and yesterday we had oral paper presentations. So this is new. We wanted to feature something with our faculty before the awards ceremony, and we decided to center it on the Springfield College seminar theme of truth. So I'll introduce the faculty momentarily, but the idea today is to kind of approach this in 3 levels if we have time. We don't have a lot of time. Firstly, to kind of hear from these faculty who represent different fields and different disciplines at Springfield College, to hear about some of the ways that the concept of truth and what we might call truth problems intersect with their fields, intersect with their research and their research interests. The second level is to kind of think about how they approach truth problems in their field as educators. How do we go about kind of dealing with truth and truth problems to the sort of 18 to 22-year-old's mind, so to speak. And then thirdly, if we have time, we might try to kind of approach it from a more global social kind of perspective. So I taught a Springfield College seminar this fall, and I taught it from a perspective of media systems, global information systems, information ecosystems, and so I'm really interested in this this concept, this theme. I think I kind of presented it to my students as an idea that maybe we're living in a post-truth era. Maybe our epistemologies, the way that we know things, how we know what we know has gotten really complicated in the past 5 to 10 years through technology and algorithms, that our information ecosystems are kind of riddled with fictions masquerading as truth. And then to complicate that, some historians, Yuval Harari, have suggested maybe we're a post-truth species. Maybe we have never had a real commitment to the truth, that we have always just been a kind of species that is more committed to fictions and storytelling. So just to kind of put those intentions on a global scale, so that's the kind of approach we're gonna take here. His area of expertise is in machine learning, simulation modeling, and developing robust decision-making strategies. His research focuses on new techniques for robot mapping and collaboration. Donna Wang. Donna is a professor of social work. Donna has more than 10 years of experience in the areas of child welfare, older adult services, and nonprofit management and program development. Her research interests include gerontology, social work education, mindfulness and spirituality, and racial equity. Letui Hong. She is an associate professor of modern languages. Her mother tongue is Vietnamese, her formative tongue is French, and her children's tongue is English. Neither French nor English are her first or second languages. Hong has been teaching at Springfield College since 1992. And Kathleen Milano. Kathleen is an assistant professor of exercise science. Among other things, she has extensive work as a sports psychology consultant to collegiate teams, competitive youth athletes, and coaches in the community. Her research interests cohere around interpersonal relationships and achievement motivation, with a particular interest in the role of teammates. Her recent work has focused on how peers may foster or undermine sport-related motivation and well-being. So to start, I just wanted to ask the faculty to kind of go through and present and discuss for a few minutes how the theme of truth relates to their work. Chairman?
Oh, awesome. Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me all here. This is wonderful to be here. So, like I just said, I'm Professor Castagno. I'm pretty new as assistant professor here. I consider myself an engineer and a computer scientist, and I thought I would share my perspective on truth kind of from that background. So I studied chemical engineering, and so in chemical engineering I learned first principle models for how mass moves around the world, how energy is transformed, chemical reactions, and all sorts of things. But I had a very naive understanding, even during my undergraduate career. I kind of believed all those things were absolute truth. I kind of believed this model was the truth. This is the way the world actually works. And I even believed the data that I put in the models was 100% correct. The data that was in the homework, that was the actual 100% truth. And that was a rude awakening when I graduated from my undergraduate degree and went into industry. And I realized the world is pretty messy. And that not everything follows these perfect models that you kind of make up. And so when I realized that huge dichotomy, my education was kind of like, I idealized kind of perfection of understanding the world, and the real job was like, there's some differences here. I wanted to dig deeper into that. And so when I went to my PhD in robotics, I really did spend a lot of time focusing on how can I kind of merge those two different things that I started seeing. And so I thought I'd kind of briefly share about robotics, these 4 points that I learned when they relate to truth for robotics. And the first one is that there is no 100% certainty. Everything is not completely known. And the second point that kind of follows from that I felt that I learned was that everything is an estimate. Every statement that you make, every fact that you believe is actually just an estimate of information that you have gathered yourself. And then the third point that kind of follows from that was that if everything is an estimate, that means everything has uncertainty. And then that also was a beautiful moment for me where I realized that it's okay to be uncertain about things. It's okay not to know exactly what the truth is. And then maybe we can discuss later, that's a good thing sometimes too. It's not being an absolutist. But in robotics, what we use is probability theory to kind of quantify that uncertainty, sometimes like means or variances or probability distributions. But no matter what tool you use, it's beautiful to understand it's okay to be uncertain. And then the final point, which was my favorite thing I learned during my PhD, is that if you break all 3 of those rules, and if you think that you're 100% certain about something, that robot will be the worst robot in the world. That's the robot that's going to fall off the cliff. That's the robot that's going to tip over, because that robot thinks that the world is one way, but it's not. It's not amendable to error. It's not adaptable. And so I think there might be some kind of cool parallels that with humans, and what we believe is that if you have an absolute mindset, you're not going to be as amendable to change and to seeing things differently. So that was just kind of my perspective and engineering kind of roboticist thing on truth.
When you were speaking about robotics and engineering, I kind of pretended to understand what you were talking about, but I really had no idea. But I think we have some overlap in some areas. So I am a social worker and proud of that. And so when I taught first year seminar last semester, one of the first things we did when we talked about truth was to, well, first of all, we got to, as we know, define what is truth. So I had the students Google what is truth. So fact, something that doesn't change, something that is real. So we started with that as a basis, and we've all heard the joke that there are no certainties in life other than what? Death and taxes. Correct. So if we go on that truth, oh wow, that's the only thing that's true in the world. It's a little discouraging. But then, there's other truths as well. So from the Buddhist perspective, the first noble truth is that that human life is suffering. Okay, so that's based on our wants and our dislikes. So I really want that professor. I really want Cheney to have French fries today. I really want to get that job. I really want to be captain of the football team. And our dislikes, like, oh, I hope it doesn't rain today. Oh, this person again, or and that causes suffering within us. Okay, so if we go by some of these, even the definition of truth is kind of not even agreed upon. So if we can't even agree upon what is truth, then how do we go about reconciling all these different perspectives? Which is also, again, one of the biggest things in first year seminar is different perspectives. Because that's, I think, the best we can do, right? So in social work, we rely on different ways of knowing. There is no one truth. So in social work, we talk about these sources of knowledge, which include authority, tradition, common sense, intuition, and the scientific method, okay? So, for example, if you're deciding where to go to college, how do you know to come to Springfield College? Like, why would you come to Springfield College? Well, tradition would be, my mom came here, my dad came here, my grandfather came here, my uncle, my cousin, everyone came here, so this is just how we do it. We go to Springfield College. Okay, that's one way of doing it. It's completely legitimate. Another one, authority. Your baseball coach said, you're going to Springfield College, no questions about it. And you said, okay, I'm going to Springfield College. That's authority. Common sense is like, well, it's the best school in the world, and it's right down the street from me, and I realize, common sense, right? So that's a way of having, of knowledge, of knowing. Intuition, you walk onto campus, you're like, yeah, this is home. This is where I belong. That's my intuition. That's a form of knowledge, a source of knowledge. And then last but not least is the scientific method. One of 5 sources of knowledge, not the end-all be-all, not it, but the scientific method, where we try to understand things from empirical data, gathering data, interpreting data, but even within the scientific method, as social workers, we believe that there's different ways of doing that. We have qualitative methods, we have quantitative methods, we have mixed methods. And I'm actually, have done all 3 in my research, including one time when I evaluated a program for a mindful movement program in urban high school students in Brooklyn, New York. We used a mixed method approach. We held focus groups, a qualitative method, to talk to the students about how did this program, if it did, help you. Then we also gathered quantitative data. We took their grades, we took their mood, we surveyed them on their mood and had fill out surveys on that as well. So we looked at it from different perspectives because we knew that if we didn't, our understanding would be incomplete. So that's one thing that I think that social workers are very good at, is being in that fuzzy gray area. But as Jeremy said, it can be also very frustrating. There's one right answer. Tell me the answer. I just need to know what the answer is. And the answer is there is no answer. So I think we'll talk about that more throughout the morning. Thanks.
It was so elegant in their approach. I don't know if I can match that, but I'll do my best. But thanks, Matt, for introducing me. I would like to add a couple things, is that what he represented in terms of my research area is really specific to a couple of projects that I've done, but when you take a more global look at what I'm actually doing, I study youth sport experiences, and I look at the social side of that. So a lot of what I bring to this conversation today is that lens through which I look at the world, is through youth sport. And my goal is to make it a great experience. And when I was thinking about this question of what's the truth in your discipline or in your work, it was a really interesting question because it's not one that we ask ourselves often. We're often just going through what we know is the next step and we've been trained to do in our science and our productivity and our scholarship and all that. And to hit pause and really think about it is a really satisfying thing to do. So if y'all haven't done that, I would encourage you to. But I also thought, what's the thing I could say at Springfield College that ties to my discipline and what I study that would ruffle feathers? And so I came up with this: sport isn't good. Right? Now I'm being a little bit dramatic, but there is some truth in that. In sport, it's not always good. And yes, I'm trying to ruffle your feathers, and we know a lot about sport that is good, and that sport is a vehicle for healthy lifestyle, lifelong physical activity, engagement, and so many endless things. Many of us probably have children or plan to have children and hope that they participate in sport. And one of the reasons that we hope is that we want them to have all these positive experiences and good things happen to them and shape really great characteristics, good morals, great leadership, the value of hard work and determination and grit and all these things. And yes, that's a great hope to have. But one thing I've learned through studying youth sport is that there's actually equal opportunity for bad as there is good. And that's a truth that we like to ignore. And the reason that we ignore it is because that isn't romanticized. What's romanticized is the good stuff in sport. Why wouldn't we want to romanticize that? That's really nice to see. You know, we see sport everywhere. We love sport at Springfield College. And so my intent in presenting these ideas is really to just get you to consider how you can make sport good. And the truth is that sport isn't inherently good. There's, like I said, equal opportunity for bad things to happen, bad behaviors to form, as there are good ones. And in order to have those good things happen, and those positive experiences, we have to be really deliberate. We have to design sport participation in a way that it is intended to elicit positive experiences, positive development, and positive behaviors during participation for really diverse individuals. And that is not an easy task. And that's why I get to study what I do, right? And I study it from both angles, what's good and what's bad about it. And I present that to you today because I know there's probably many of you who are teaching students who hope to have careers in sport, or many of you who are students and will have careers in sport and may even work with young kids. And you have a lot of opportunity to make a huge difference there if you're intentional about how you design your sport participation for these young people. And so that's really my key takeaway, is that the opportunity for good and bad experiences to emerge, or for sport to have a positive or a negative influence, starts when we're really young. And what we actually see is that there's a pattern of participation, and the reasons for decline in participation around the time we're teenagers. And we can all probably think of a lot of different reasons why people would drop off. But by and large, it's because the experience wasn't good for everyone. And if it was, we'd have a lot more of a consistent pattern of participation. So when we see people drop off, we see a drop off in physical activity later in life. So if we're able to make it more adaptable and better for everyone involved, we're going to have a healthier lifestyle for a larger number of people in our population. So there's not really like 4 elegant points that I would like to make. I just really wanted to put it in your mind that sport can be good and bad, and we all are in a position, my guess, or we will be or have been in a position to make it good. And I want you to just think about how we might go about doing that. And I'm trying through my research. It's a slow roll, but we have a lot of people exploring this. So that's really what I want to do. Sport isn't inherently good.
Now is my turn. As a language teacher, when I'm faced with a word that is difficult, when I see my student facing a word that is difficult, like the word truth, I tell them to circumvent the word and use other notions, other words. So I prefer to go on to the notion of interpretation instead of the notion of truth. And from the notion of interpretation, I'm thinking of the notion of stereotyping, the stereotype and the cliche. And thinking about the word stereotype and the word cliche, we tend to, or the young people maybe do not know that those words come from the printing industry. And for example, stereo is the word for embossing en relief, 3-dimensional. Type is that mold for each letter. So the imprinting, the technique of stereotyping allow for mass production, cheaper production, but of a lesser quality. And therefore, the connotation of that is carried over to the figurative meaning that is used later in sociology and psychiatry. And the same way, the word cliche is for the printing of images. And it used to be a metallic plate that allowed for printing of images, and later on was taken over by photography. So they call it photography cliche. And the same way was when that is no longer in use, it was taken over by only the figurative meaning of it is left over. And so those are and we retain from that the notion of banality, repetition, and cheaper quality, that type of thing. But the idea of repetition, because it allows reproduction of a lot of things. But that's a digression into the first meanings of the words. Now I would like to go into that, the figurative meaning of the word. And in order to practice, in order to ask you to practice the notion of stereotypes and cliche and see how they work in real life, I would like to play a game with you. And I use the posters from a movie, from the same movie that is produced in France, and the posters are distributed in other countries. So it is distributed in France, and then in Italy, in the US, in Austria, and in Japan, because those are the only posters I could find on the internet. Let me tell you about you see the poster in France. Let me give you a brief summary of the movie, and then ask you to think about. I will ask you specific question, and you will help me. This movie is about a group of students in in an underperforming school who take part in a project about the Shoah in France. The Shoah or Holocaust doesn't seem to concern the students because some students are newer immigrants from African countries and some are Muslim. The teacher made it a history lesson and pushed students to become invested in it, although they did not connect with it on a familial or religious level. And so the movie invites this debate. Can the lesson of one historical memory of one group of people be useful to diverse group of people, of students? And how can the teacher justify that this project would shape the national building identity of her student? And so that was basically the movie. And the topic seems to be kind of a boring student to look at, and therefore I had to coat it with sugar. Get them to watch it. But for you, I would like to show the different posters and ask you, the marketing professionals imagine that the public of each country relate to something specific. And so I need you to help me to figure out what is it in the images chosen for the public of each country. What is it? What stereotype, what cliche do the movie makers target for each group of each nations, each country? So we start with this is the French. We'll go back to the French part. See how different it is from the American film. Yes. Now let's see. Yeah. And then I just want to show you. And then the Italian poster looks like this.
Okay.
And then this is the Austrian. Austria is in Europe, in case you know. Missed the spelling. They have no kangaroo. This is from Austria. And then this is from Japan. So if we hold up all these all at once, can you tell me what kind of cliche, what kind of stereotypes are targeted for each group of people? Just from looking at it.
It's interesting, the Japanese poster has the red-haired teacher. She's prominent.
Yes.
Or Kageno
Yes.
red-haired Anne Green Gables. It's kind of that smart, independent woman.
And the clothes. Look at the clothes
The
also.
clothes, yeah, very professional.
Yeah, the clothes is very professional. Here in this picture, you don't see her at all.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that says something about what you assume about the Japanese. Yeah. And what else is there? And you can see this almost the same thing with the Austrian. The teacher's face is right in front, and the teacher's face is nice, pretty, and smiling. Yeah. And and if we look at these, comparing to the U.S. distribution, what is it that we can assume about the way that the movie makers stereotype the U.S.? What can you say?
Racial conflict.
Yeah, like white savior.
That we are the diverse. Or look at the
Individualism.
boxing.
Individualism, they're all
Yeah.
separate from each other and doing their own thing, whereas everywhere else are in a group.
Yeah. Yes, the boxes that separate each face of the students and focus on the students versus the teacher, isn't it? So there's a clear stereotyping or cliche to market this film for each country. And oh, I forgot about the Italy. Oh, the Italy.
It's a party there.
Dolce Vita. So you have
Wine or
balloons
something.
and it's so stereotypical, isn't it? So Italians are like that. like to do that. The little game shows us many factors that are at play that shape our taste or preference, and they are invisible or undetectable unless we ask questions of everything, and especially of our manner of thinking. That's what I get students to do.
So, Latui, that kind of presents a segue to my next question. You're kind of showing us a pedagogical way that you would approach having students explore the idea. Instead of truth, there's interpretation. So maybe we could hear from some of the other people about how they approach these truth problems in their field. This is how you approach a truth problem, or the complexity of truth across cultures, in languages and literature. How about the other fields? That's a tough question.
I think I'm in a fortunate position where a lot of young kids play sport. So most of us, if I ask in this room, like, actually, let's do it. How many of you have played sport at some point in your life? Raise your hand. Okay, that's pretty much every single person in this room. So I rely heavily on storytelling and using personal connection to sport experiences, and then tying that to what we know from the literature, what we know from the studies that we're doing together. So I really draw from their experiences to help guide and shape how we have the discussions. And I think I am really lucky in that sense. I can't imagine most people have experience building robots. But yeah, I understand that I'm lucky in that respect, and I totally lean into it. So.
Okay. Donna, sure.
Yeah, just something that I really liked was the concept of challenging assumptions that you're making, and challenging assumptions, or even like going deep into what you're assuming about everything that you're observing. I've been doing that a little bit in my class, where I kind of learned from my experience, where I wish my teachers told me like all the assumptions I was making in these models. So sometimes I teach something that's simple, you know what I mean, and make sure they're on board. Then a few weeks later I say, I was lying to you. And I say, here's more details, and now you can kind of see these hidden things that I was trying to show about. So that's one thing I like to do, is I like to show them, you should challenge me. Challenge me when I present you a simple model about what kind of assumptions I might be making, and have a conversation and discussion about that.
So allow them to settling into a belief that they have landed on a graspable truth, and then pulling the rug out from under them.
Yeah, you're right. That's what I'm doing. That's right. That's what I do. But I do it like every 3 weeks after. So.
Okay.
You really make them solidify.
Yeah.
I think in social work, when we talk about interpretation, it's with the humility and understanding that, so my interpretations will be very different than yours. And these are impacted, if we go a little bit further, by our perspectives in social work. So the psychological, the social, the political, the medical, physical well-being of the person. So our perspectives are even more complicated because they're impacted by our own personal disposition characteristics. And that your truth everyone's truth is subjective. So what's true to you may not be true to me. So when you and I are talking, we're negotiating, it's your truth, not only your truth, but the person that is interacting with you, who's now like intertwined. So we have this truth, we have our own perceptions of it, and then we have our interactions with people who have the other, complex interpretations. So to always just remember that you may think that you know, that you have it down pat, but then it's most likely to be challenged.
In my case, it is about instead of about the truth, it is about comprehension. They should practice. They should focus on the practice, on the steps going toward that comprehension. It doesn't mean that they should completely obliterate that contemplation of a truth or the truth. But it's best to leave that contemplation of the truth or a truth during their swimming session or yoga session or basketball session, or doing the good sides of the sport.
I think we need to stop around 12:50, but we have a little bit of time if the audience, I want to make sure we leave enough time for the awards, but I want to give the audience a chance if they're interested to pose any questions.
Easy questions.
Easy questions.
Go ahead.
Thanks for this, great. I'm Kate Dugan in Religious Studies, and I was kind of curious about when you raise these questions with students, right? Like how do, it's hard for those of us who are 18 or have been 18, like to realize that what you took for granted is maybe not always that 2 + 2 is 4. Or, I'm in religious studies. How do you like help each other investigate these questions and then deal with sort of like the feelings, frankly, that come with realizing that the world is maybe not as stable as I maybe wish it was or thought it was?
Okay, we said easy questions.
So I think for me, like when we had students explore truth in the first year, we used art, for example. I think I added to their perspective. So for example, I had them create their own piece of art for whatever that was. And I said it can be a drawing, it can be poetry, it can be, you choose, because this is up to you. You're delving deeper into your truth. So sort of just adding and building upon perhaps what they is familiar and comfortable to them, just adding another dimension for them to think about. And then I asked them, I said, how was that art that you folks did? Did you like doing that? And most of them were like, no. I'm like, well, but that's okay. You know, that's not the point. Is that you've explored something that of interest or that you care about through a different lens. So maybe not at this point shattering, you know, everything that they've known to be true. But also, I think at this age, students are also really eager to hear different things. That's what I found, and that was also, you know, an opportunity to share things that. You know, maybe they haven't heard before. You know, I brought the monk in, right, from my first year seminar. There's this 35-year-old white man in an orange robe walking into our room, and they're like, they just couldn't even fathom. They still talk about him on the way out of class. So just sort of adding to what they already know.
In the case of language or literature, when I'm talking about the truth or the idea of a reference for the perfection, we are talking about grammar rules and sentence structures, and it is, if you abide by all that, that's perfection. But when you are looking at poets who are distorting or transforming those grammar rules or those sentence structure, you get invited, you know, to invited into that creative process of the poet. But you can only be invited if you already knew the codes and the perfection reference. And then you can go around and appreciate all the beauty of the deviation and transgression of that particular perfection and reference.
On that note, I think we have to tie things up. But if everyone could give another round of applause. I really wish we had more time for that. I have so many thoughts and questions. Maybe next year we'll try to have some more time for this if we can. But I want to make sure we do what we're, in some ways, is the highlight of this ceremony or this event is to recognize the people, the students who have done such great work here. And I'll just say, as an evaluator, this is one of the hardest things that we all do. We have a small army of evaluators evaluating multimedia works, posters, and our oral conference presentations. And it is so challenging, and our rubrics, we use rubrics, we try to be rigorous about it, but it is always, there's so many great works, it's tough to have to pick two. But then again, there are always some that really stand out. So that's why we're here today, is to celebrate them. So without further ado, I'm going to start with the category of science. Elizabeth, do you want to help me?
Should we release our panelists so they don't fail?
Oh yeah, you're welcome to do that. Thank you. So first place in the category of science goes to David Handren, who unfortunately can't make it today. I don't know if anyone came to receive the award for him. His poster was Comparing Drosophila, oh boy, Comparing Drosophila melanogaster gene CG1536 with homologs such as human and C. Second place goes to Emily Gebhardt for a poster entitled Antimicrobial Activity in Ferulic Acid Derivatives. Okay, in the category of social science, first place goes to Caitlin Garrity and Chandani Rana. A case study of 6 Vietnamese Americans and their friendships. Okay. Yeah.
Where's John?
She's working. There you go.
Yeah.
Who didn't excuse her?
Okay. In the clinical case study category, social science, second place, Sarah Picard for analysis of parents' item-specific comments on the caregiver-parent understanding the child questionnaire. The next category, clinical case study. First place for Kaylee Langer for the paper, the poster SLAP. I'm not, is SLAP or SLAP? SLAP tear with associated axillary nerve compression in a 20-year-old male wrestler, a clinical case study. Thank you. Second place goes to Anderson Nguyen for the effects of stress hyperglycemia in association with myocardial infarction, mortality in adults and elderly hospitalization. Multimedia. Critical interpretation project. First, we have a tie for first place in this category. So the awards go to Chaz Zawacki for which anterior cruciate ligament surgery yields the greatest range of motion and the least pain. And Chaz couldn't make it today. I'm not sure if there's anybody here. The other award goes to Zachary Chouette for effects of living in rural versus urban areas in correlation to life expectancy. Okay, in the multimedia category, I just want to say that I'm especially excited about this one. The first place winners were 3 students in their signature assignment project for my Springfield College seminar. So first place in multimedia goes to Ian Torres, Kaylee Joyle, and Luke Doraz for social media and mental health visual gallery. Great work, guys. Go. Thank you. Second place goes to Chad Toussaint for his animation Teach a Raccoon to Fish. Is Chad here? No? Congratulations. This is wonderful. And for the conference paper category, first place goes to Taylor Gibson for the paper, The Blanket, The Power of Writing in Nico King's and Ghost Bread. And lastly, but not least, Ariana Secchio for the paper Native American Basketball in the Poetry of Sherman Alexie and Natalie Diaz. And that concludes our closing ceremony. Thank you for coming. Thank you for everybody. I want to say thank you to all the faculty sponsors, for those of them that are here. This is also a tribute to your work in guiding those students, so thank you again, and thanks for coming.